Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
And you got Luke.
Luke, we're taking something that's in the news right now and bringing it onto the show. Talking about pandemics.
Yeah, so this was my recommendation.
It was.
And I thought it was going to be, interesting.
It is.
While it is very interesting, I've found it incredibly sad. So there's a small outside chance I may cry on today's episode.
I hope you do. Show some emotion for a change, Luke.
I am.
So what I found really interesting, and I won't cry about this, what I found interesting, and again, history guy here, I guess, is the amount that these pandemics changed the world. And I don't necessarily mean I'm sorry, 10 million people died from this. Terrible, big change. But cities that got ransacked while they were being decimated by these diseases, that they otherwise would have been able to defend or things like that. Crazy amount of stuff happened like that.
Yeah, literally the course of history could have been different had these not existed because, like you said, different countries would be able to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And the other thing, too, that I found, and I guess it's just, history, and they don't have the medical knowledge that we have, and you're always getting better and better and better.
Hopefully.
But the fact that some of this stuff reoccurred so many times, I looked up cholera. Apparently, there's been 6 major cholera epidemics in the last 200 years. It's how do you have one after the first one? Just don't do whatever it was again.
Yeah, that seems likely.
Just don't do it again.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so before we get into these terrible, terrible things. A little bit about pandemic versus epidemic. An epidemic occurs when a disease affects a greater number of people than is usual for the locality that it's happening at. A pandemic is an epidemic of worldwide proportions. So it's one thing if everybody in the U.S. is getting a certain flu or a disease or something. But when that starts to spread globally, that's when it becomes a pandemic and kind of gets out of control.
So a perfect example is Ebola, hemorrhagic fever. It's an epidemic in West Africa, where it happened, Sierra Leone and some different areas. So it's an epidemic there, but it's not a pandemic because it was very
it didn't get everywhere else. Okay.
And I read a stat, and this is where it started to get sad. In 2016 and 17, between 3 countries, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and there was one other country, the super close West Africa. I forget the other country.
I've never even heard of Sierra Leone.
12,000 people died. And in the United States, 3 people got sick and only 1 person died.
Wow.
Because I think it was a doctor. I think you remember, it was back in 2014, a couple doctors had traveled to Africa. They came back and were sick.
Yeah.
And 1 died, and the other 3 doctors or nurse volunteers, they lived. So it's just...
It's crazy how that happens.
So it makes you, super appreciative of, the advances we have in health just living in the country we live in, because 12,000 people die from a disease, 1 person in all the United States died from that same disease.
Yeah,
crazy.
It is. So a little bit more about epidemics and pandemics. Pandemics didn't used to be a thing.
Yeah, they
because
couldn't be.
People didn't transmit these diseases across borders and whatnot.
Yeah, but they weren't jumping on planes.
Right, and so now the more that humans became more civilized, let's say building larger cities and actually creating trade routes between these cities, waging wars, whatever the case may be, that was getting people from one geography or location to another. That's when these pandemics really started, because they would bring diseases either that they were suffering from or maybe that their bodies were able to fight off because of being exposed to them before into these new locations and just starting these pandemics to spread. Super fascinating about how that worked. But also the severity of the pandemics really makes you understand why we take things like bird flu or Zika or the coronavirus so seriously. My wife was even commenting on how, are we really supposed to be that afraid of this? Look at the stats and all this. And it's but we keep it under wraps so much. We keep it controlled, and we're taking all these measures because of just how bad these things can actually turn out. And we're going to have endless examples here of some of the bad ones.
Yeah, and I also think that unfortunately, I think that if you when you and I were growing up, like in the 80s, right? The only thing we ever heard about was from the movie Outbreak and Ebola, and I was deathly afraid of that, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I think things are happening at a greater pace nowadays. Like, just in the last couple of years, like the fact that we can just ramble off, Zika and a bird flu and Corona. I mean, the fact that those are top of our mind, like I would never even think of that, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And unfortunately, I think it's just going to keep on happening at a more rapid pace.
Sure.
Which stinks.
Until we cure all diseases.
Yeah.
Which isn't that far off.
I hope it's not
me
that far
too.
off.
Just think how long I could live.
Take a pill.
Oh, that'd be
How nice
great.
would that be?
All right, so the first earliest recorded pandemic in 430 BC was in Athens. This happened during the Peloponnesian War. Did you like that? Peloponnesian?
You nailed it.
So after the disease passed through Libya, Ethiopia, Egypt, it got into Athens as the Spartans laid siege to the city. So as much as 2/3 of the population died from it. No good. Fever, thirst, bloody throat and tongue, red skin, lesions, all sorts of bad stuff happened there. So that was the first known one. And again, this is when people from one region started moving into another one.
Yeah, because they were taking
that
over,
disease with them.
waging war.
Yeah. In 165 AD, the Antonian Plague showed up. So the Antonian Plague, what I thought was interesting about this one, was that it's possibly the earliest appearance of smallpox, and it began with the Huns. So the Huns then infected the Germans, who passed it to the Romans, blah, blah, blah. I guess that's not nice because it was very serious.
Yeah,
but
we don't blah any of this.
Moving along, the plague continued until about 180 AD. So it continued for 15 years, claiming Emperor Marcus Aurelius as one of its victims.
I saw that.
Yeah, that's sad. Okay. Moving on. I just have like a whole bunch to rattle through. Should I do that?
Just rattle through a couple of the highlight ones.
Okay, I'm going to skip that one. How about 541 AD, the Justinian Plague? First appearing in Egypt, it spread through Palestine and the Byzantine Empire through the Mediterranean. It changed the course of the empire, squelching Emperor Justinian's plans to bring the Roman Empire back together and caused massive economic struggles. It's also credited with creating an apocalyptic atmosphere that spurred the rapid spread of Christianity. So this is the kind of stuff that when I was reading through this, I just thought was fascinating. Like, this disease actually spurred on the spread of an entire religion.
Yeah, and
which I never would have thought of.
And could you imagine just like the fear you would have like back in these days of catching the plague and the way like the way that most of these plagues were transmitted was through the fleas on
a lot of them,
on rodents. So it's like it was virtually impossible to control that just because of sanitation and the way these cities were set up. So there was almost no way to do it. And I mean, it was literally like a total, 50-50 if you were going to get the plague or not get the plague, and the mortality rates were terrible.
Oh yeah, through the roof.
Yeah.
This one, in 541 AD, it reoccurred throughout the next 2 centuries, which is a long time, and it killed about 50 million people, 50 million people, 26% of the world's population. This pandemic killed a quarter of the people in the world. That's unbelievable. It's believed, this is also kind of interesting. It's not so fun fact, right? It's believed to be the first significant appearance of the bubonic plague. So, we've all heard of that, but we didn't know it was necessarily associated with this. The next one I was going to talk about was in the 11th century. Did you have any earlier ones?
No, the only big one I have, I think you have up next is the Black Death. So if you want to hit your 11th century one first.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting. It's leprosy, and again, another one that we've probably all heard of, right? It's been around for ages. Leprosy grew in Europe in the Middle Ages, resulting in the building of numerous leprosy-focused hospitals to accommodate all of the victims. It's a slow-developing bacterial disease, and it causes sores and deformities, and I think that's what we all most associate with leprosy, is those sores and the deformities. And what was interesting is it was believed to be a punishment from God that ran in families. And so this actually, like, as I mean, it was terrible and people were dying from it or getting exiled or whatever, but there was a lot of moral judgment and ostracizing of victims. So not just getting them out of the way so nobody gets this disease or something like that. People were getting ostracized because others believed that this was a punishment from God on their family. Wrong. Right. So not so fun fact, leprosy is now known as Hansen's disease.
The Hansen brothers?
That's actually what I wrote here. Why is it named after that? It's because it's named after the plague that the boy band Hansen brought on the world, which is not true. That is not true or funny, Luke.
Bop.
Bop.
Sorry.
Oh, man, I like that.
Sorry.
Did you know that they were 3 boys at the time? One I thought was a girl.
I didn't know.
She was very cute. But anyways, it still affects tens of thousands of people each year and can be fatal if not treated with antibiotics.
Isn't that crazy that the leprosy is still around?
I know. That's 11th century. Crazy. Okay, before we get into yours, let's take a break for a word from our sponsor.
We need a happy sponsor for this
one. I mean, UPMC or somebody should pony up some bucks for the good work we're doing. But we don't have a sponsor once again. Wah, wah. But we do have a couple shout-outs.
Nice. Who do we got?
RJP wants to know the difference between an architect and a civil engineer.
Real quick.
Good question. Go ahead.
Civils make the ground that the buildings that the architect design goes on top of.
I think that was a good summary there, Luke. I think that's fair. Roads, ground, that stuff.
The
actual building
stuff
design.
that architects put on top of is civils.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah. And then Matt R. also wrote in. He drives from Red Bluff to Chico.
Northern California, way to go.
Northern California. All right. Good job, Luke. He knows his geography. He did not just Google that
I did not
when I asked where it was. He's an ME student at Chico State.
Mudcats.
Mudcats, okay. Are Mudcats a thing?
I don't know.
They're the Mudcats. All right. Suggest we check out the show on Amazon Inventions. I assume this means it's like inventions that ended up on Amazon, or this is on Amazon Prime, and not necessarily inventions from the Amazon.
I guess we'll have to find out.
Yeah,
we'll have to check it out. Thank you for the recommendation,
thanks, Matt. If any of you have recommendations, why don't you email us? And do it at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com.
Make sure you subscribe. Write in for some stickers. Review us, like us, share us.
Man, if we got to like 250 reviews this year, I'd be really excited. I mean, we'd still be poor. But
yes.
Yeah. All right, moving on.
So let's lighten this up a little bit and talk about the Black Death.
Lighten it up a little.
So the Black Death, also known as the pestilence, or the Great Plague, or the Plague.
That's when you know you've made it as a disease.
Yeah, when the word black is added to the name of the disease that you have, the Black Death, the Black Plague. So this was considered one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. It resulted in the deaths of an estimated 75 to 200 million people in Eurasia, peaking in Europe from 1347 to 1351. So it was a pretty short time frame.
But all the death.
But this is like when you see all those old-timey like medieval movies and like there's bodies on carts. I think that's what that is kind of representing, is the Black Death.
Bring out your dead.
Yeah. And those stupid rats, the little fleas on the rats.
Yeah. Third of the world's population. It's a pretty good amount.
Isn't
it scary though that it's like estimated 75 to 200 million?
Yeah, that's
what
a pretty
range.
wide estimate.
My goodness, that's terrible. England and France, that's who I always associated with it. But like you said, it was all over the place. And I didn't even know that because I'm an ignorant American. England and France were so incapacitated by the plague that the country called a truce to their war. The British feudal system collapsed when the plague changed the economic circumstances of the area. Ravaging populations in Greenland, the Vikings lost the strength to wage battle, which was kind of their go-to thing against the native populations, and their exploration of North America also halted, all because of this disease. So, again, just changing the world. 1492, I have the Columbian Exchange. I think we all have heard about this one.
Good coffee company.
We should start that. I don't know if the marketing department will agree, but boy, I like that. We've all heard of this one, even if you don't know it by that name. So following the arrival of the Spanish in the Caribbean...
They totally messed everything up.
Yeah, diseases such as smallpox, measles, and bubonic plague were passed along to the native populations by the, invading Europeans. With no previous exposure to these diseases, as many as 90% were thought to have died through the North and South continents because of this disease.
Yeah.
That's nuts. This is sad. We celebrate Christopher Columbus on his holiday, and his arrival to the island of Hispaniola, he encountered the Taino people.
Yeah, good. He nailed it.
Sure. Population 60,000. By 1548, population less than 500.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of devastating effect it had. And of course, in 1520, we know about the Aztec Empire being destroyed by smallpox, intentionally given to them as well as brought over by African slaves.
So some facts about a fact or two. Smallpox killed 300 million people in the 20th century. And it says one of two. I couldn't find the other one. It's one of the only totally eradicated diseases that have been a pandemic previously. So back in 1980, it was totally eradicated. So you cannot get smallpox anymore.
Huh. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a chance that it comes back as like a super smallpox. We'll call it large
with
pox.
all this antibiotic resistance stuff you hear about,
yeah,
like everybody's overdoing antibiotics, and yeah.
Ugh, terrible. Did you see the 1665 Great Plague of London? It was, of course, the second appearance of the bubonic plague that led to the death of 20% of London's population. I think it also aligned with some great fire they had there, and that's when it kind of ended. So good job, fire. I don't know if it was the sole cause of it, but, I guess that helps. You mentioned the cholera pandemics and how they were just
There's a bunch
all over the place. 1817 was the first one, the first of seven cholera pandemics over the next 150 years. Small intestine infection originated in Russia. I had an intestine infection a year ago. That was not pleasant.
That'd be terrible.
1 million people died in Russia. It spread through feces, poop water as you like to call it, and in the food. It reached the British Empire, and its navy spread cholera to Spain, Africa, Indonesia, China, Japan, so on, so on, and so on. It killed 150,000 more people, and a vaccine was created in 1885, but the pandemic continued.
Yeah.
I didn't know they were making vaccines back then.
So cholera, research estimates, and this is today, research estimates that each year there's over 1.3 million to 4 million cases of cholera.
Yeah.
And these numbers, they vary so much, but 21,000 to 143,000 deaths are still occurring due to cholera.
That's nuts.
Again, it's where you're born. I mean, you take so many things for granted when you live in a country where most of the stuff doesn't exist. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah. I have two more that I want to talk about that are like huge old / now we're getting into more modern times as well. Mm-hmm. And then I have a big list of other ones that I'd like to talk about, maybe some of the coronavirus info and how we cure it. But the last two I wanted to mention, the first one was in 1918, the Spanish flu. It was an avian-borne flu. So I think we're getting lame with our names. We just say everything's a bird flu now. Well, this was a bird flu. It resulted in 50 million deaths worldwide. The Spanish flu is theorized to have originated in China and was spread by Chinese laborers being transported by the railways across Canada on their way to Europe. And in North America, the flu first appeared in Kansas. So, the three people that live in Kansas, they were one of the first ones in early 1918. And it was visible in Europe by the spring, so this thing was spreading pretty fast. By October, hundreds of thousands of Americans had died, and body storage scarcity hit crisis level. The flu threat disappeared in the summer of 1919, when most of the infected had either developed immunities on their own or had died off by that time. not so fun fact about those numbers, often considered the most devastating epidemic in history, or pandemic in history, it killed more than World War I did.
Influenza, 2017 and 18, 61,000 people died worldwide.
Holy
How are people still dying of the flu?
I know, right? Do you get flu shots?
I never used to. I got one this year. And you know what? I think I'm going to start doing it, especially after
doing this.
After this research.
My mother-in-law makes us get them. So thanks for the love, I suppose, right? But yeah, they hurt. I pinch my little arm. I don't like that. Then a couple days later, I think it's worth it getting the flu. No, it's not. 1981, the last one I want to talk about here. HIV/AIDS. So first identified in 81, so probably around before that. AIDS destroys a person's immune system. It results in the eventual death of the disease. And it seems just like a terrible way to go. I have some details on like what it does, destroying the T cells and so on. But I think most of our listeners are probably fairly familiar with this disease. Treatments have been developed to slow the progress of the disease, but 35 million people worldwide or more have died of AIDS since its discovery, and a cure obviously yet to be found. So super, super bad. And didn't you say that it's maybe the worst overall over time?
It's listed as the worst overall over time pandemic.
Wow. So on that cheery note, let's take a break for this week's Luke's rant.
Okay.
I don't know what you have to rant about.
So this isn't a rant. This is a step up and do something message. So every 2 minutes, a kid dies from malaria in third world countries, which is exceptionally sad to me. So what I'm going to ask all of our listeners to do is to check out one of these 3 donation sites. And one of the best things they can actually do in these countries that's easy, it's inexpensive, is they actually sleep in netted beds so that the mosquitoes actually can't get in and bite them at night while they're sleeping and whatnot. So they are nothingbutnets.net.
Nothingbutnets.net.
Just how it sounds. The next one is the cdcfoundation.org. So that's cdcfoundation.org altogether. And then the last one is malarianomore.org. So that's malarianomore.org altogether, no spaces. And it's just it's crazy to me that it's 2020 and literally during the course of this podcast 15 kids have died of malaria, of a curable disease that they can be prevented. So ask all of our listeners, check it out, donate it. I'm going to buy a few nets this week online. I think that would be something we could do to help make this world a better place. See, I said I was almost going to cry. I'm getting close, but I'm not going to.
Yeah. So. Okay, moving on. No, that was well done, Luke.
You're a bad crier.
That was nice. Okay, moving on.
So I have a list of like other notable, not like super specific times. So we talked about cholera. We talked about influenza, measles. This is back in 2017. Measles in 2017 caused an estimated 110,000 deaths. This is 2017, people. How is this possible?
Yeah.
And again, this is not in developed countries. This is all happening in third world countries. This one amazed me because I always thought that what was that movie with Doc Holliday? Didn't he die of tuberculosis?
Yeah.
So
watch Tombstone. That's why I know
Tombstone. That. Yeah. So tuberculosis, a total of 1.5 million people died of TB in 2018.
Yeah.
That's 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And tuberculosis. That's crazy to me. So those are just the other kind of like that this is still happening. And then I have a list of
that is crazy that it's still happening, right? It says like in wealthier countries it's very rare.
Yeah, super rare.
But it's second only to AIDS or HIV in some of the poorer countries. That's terrible.
So then I have a list of things I was afraid of.
Oh, I want to hear what you were afraid of. Maybe I could use this to my advantage in the future.
So thank you very much, Dustin Hoffman. I forget
Rain
what
Man?
year it was. Yeah,
Wasn't he Rain Man?
Yeah, Rain Man basically ruined my. I was like 85. I can't remember when the movie came out. Maybe 93. But the movie Outbreak came out, and I was deathly afraid of catching Ebola. So if you remember in the movie, West African country. Monkey gets brought over from Africa, and monkey scratches the kid at like a pet store. Next thing you know, the whole town catches Ebola, and they got to catch the monkey. And it was just a terrible movie that I had nightmares for the longest time I was going to catch Ebola. But Ebola, also called hemorrhagic fever, has, if you ever have this, James, go see a doctor immediately.
Thank you.
The initial symptoms include fever, headache, muscle pain, chills. You're later going to experience bleeding resulting in vomiting and clotting blood. Basically, watch the movie, and you'll know what this is going to look and feel like, but go see a doctor. I was afraid of bird flu. So just a few years ago, that H5N1, the avian flu, was all the rage. I guess that's what we say. So this is basically a strain of influenza that specifically comes from birds. And I saw an infographic of how you catch this. And it was a guy holding a chicken. It was like this cartoon, and it was all written.
Not funny.
It was all written in some language I couldn't imagine, but like it was like, don't hold the chicken up against your body. Hold the chicken further out, and if the chicken flaps
reasonable
its
advice.
wings, all this, particles come. I mean, it was all about. It was the craziest thing. So again, this is a flu transmitted from birds. Highly curable if treated, but you can die. Weakened immune systems, older people, younger people, that sort of stuff. And then the one I was really afraid of, because it came from mosquitoes, was Zika. So it was that maybe 4 or 5 years ago? Zika was all the rage.
I don't know if it was even that long. Might have been just 2 or 3.
So Zika, fever, rash, joint pain, red eyes.
I feel like, how bad is that? Like, I already get rashes. I have arthritis. I have joint pain.
Your eyes are always
Sometimes
red.
I have red eyes, but that's different.
Yeah.
I mean, but go on.
So those 3 in particular. So back in
Wasn't that really bad for pregnant women as well?
Yeah,
like
Zika
it could be
was
transferred.
because what happened? Zika did something to the development of the baby's brains.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah, it was really bad.
Okay.
So those were the 3 that I've been most afraid of, but I'm going to add this Corona Light virus.
Did you see that Corona's like tweeting about this? Like, no like
not.
People are actually thinking that there is some sort of tie. This is what I've heard, is that people are thinking there's a tie to Corona beer and this. And they're like, again, we do not cause coronavirus. Like, its symptoms are this. Symptoms of drinking Corona are like, I saw it was like something, craving Taco Bell and waking up next to someone you don't know. And I was like,
terrible.
oh my.
That's terrible.
But tell me about this one. I don't get it.
So coronavirus, the crazy thing is, coronavirus is just a broad name for lots of other things. So when they say coronavirus,
right, I saw that.
What they're specifically talking about is 2019 NCOV. That's the specific strain that is happening. But if you go to the WHO's website, World Health,
the band,
not the band, World Health Organization, there's tons of stuff listed underneath coronavirus that's been happening. This particular strain was first reported from Wuhan, China.
Wuhan.
Just like 2 months ago, the 31st of December, 2019. And basically, this thing has exploded. And, I mean, to the point where some of our coworkers have some travel restrictions where they were supposed to be going to, some countries in APAC, and they're actually not going to APAC.
Nobody knows what APAC is.
Asia, Australia, Asia Pacific area.
There you go.
So the reason why this one is particularly difficult is the infection rate and the transmission is super easy. It's person to person, just like typical flus, but it's really easy to catch, and it's a little stronger from what I've read than like a typical. I caught this year's version of the flu. Up to date, the numbers I saw was 200 people have died from it already. Mm-hmm. Again, most of them have weakened immune systems, or they're elderly or super young. But yeah, it's bad. And if you look at the heat map of how this thing starts, I mean, and you talked about this at the top of the show, as soon as you travel, I mean, on an airplane, a whole entire airplane got quarantined out on the West Coast that was coming from, I don't know if they were coming from China or maybe it was an indirect flight, but the whole plane got quarantined at a military base because they think someone on the plane might have this coronavirus. So here's what you do to prevent it. If you don't know this, frequently wash your hands, people, using an alcohol-based hand rub or soap and water. Soap and water is way better. And I took a food safety handling course.
I remember.
And I'm a food safety manager now.
You are.
You should be able to do the whole entire ABCs while you're washing your hand. None of this, and you're out of there. A, B, C,
I just
D,
spit on
E,
my
F,
hands.
G. That's disgusting. So yeah, wash your hands for a proper amount of time. Sneeze into your elbows. Like this. Don't sneeze like chew, like in your face. Sneeze into your elbows. If you sneeze into a tissue, make sure you throw it out right away. Don't touch your eyes or face. Anytime you're out in public and you're touching, public stuff, doorknobs, handrails, that sort of stuff, make sure you always carry some type of. And then these two are interesting, and it's because of the countries. If you happen to be in an area that's currently experiencing, make sure you stay away from contact with animals. Don't consume raw or undercooked animal products, and make sure you avoid cross-contamination with foods that might not be at the appropriate temperature.
Very helpful. So that's how you avoid a disease. Real quick, and I know we're at time, but I wanted to talk about how we cure a disease.
You got to catch the monkey.
Yeah, well, you have to catch the monkey. This is from our friends at Bayer. Strong Pittsburgh representation Bayer has.
Covestro now, right?
Yeah. Here's how you cure a disease in 8 simple steps.
Simple.
So I watched this video from Bayer, and it became very clear that this was justification for why drugs cost so much money. But it was interesting nonetheless. So, Bayer, if you want to use some of that money to sponsor Unprofessional Engineering, reach out to me. Step 1, research. Thousands of articles need to be read to understand what could help, how things interact together, so on and so forth. Lab experiments. Test the drugs in the labs to see how they actually work, as opposed to what you think they're going to do theoretically. 3, molecular research. This is where you test,
and I get involved.
Yes, obviously. This is where you test your best options. Like, you think of the people with the Petri dishes. That's kind of what they're doing there. After it's successful there, or you find one that's successful, hopefully at least, human testing. You need more than 1,000 people with exactly this matching disease, and you also have to make sure that they don't have a lot of other things going on, so that you know that what you're testing is really what's happening, like what's going to be curing them.
Gotcha.
So then they add in administration. You fill out all of your papers for the government. On average, for a new drug, this is about 500,000 pages of documentation that you're filling out.
Well, you don't want to kill people when you're trying to treat them, so I get there's some process you gotta go through.
Patents, so you got to make sure you're the only one making money on the drug, so you have to fill out your patents.
That's the sad piece.
But to be fair, you're investing all of this money, right?
Polio guy gave his away for free.
Well, that's good. Production. Set up a factory to pump out your drugs so you can make your money. And 8, logistics. Figure out the method to distribute the drug around the world, which also makes sense. Now, a lot of these bigger companies obviously have those things set up ahead of time because of these other drugs they make, but still, all good. Now, I kind of said that snarkily that this is about justifying the costs. The average cost of making a new drug is 1 billion euros.
Whoa.
Also, there's a 90% chance that the drug's going to fail along the way somewhere.
Wow.
So I know everybody hates paying for drugs, and I do too, and the way insurance works, and we're not going to get into all of that. It's a super expensive process to go through and find a drug that actually treats these diseases.
The thing that makes me mad is when it's a drug that's been around forever and it's proven, like insulin. And that is crazy expensive.
Yeah,
like, why is insulin expensive? I mean, figure out a way. So I get new drug development is expensive, and they have to amortize that cost over a number of years to get their money back.
That was a word.
You like that? But like old drugs that have been around for a while, like when I was saying all these kids are dying of these diseases all over the world, how is that still happening? Just make it free, send it, airdrop it. Bill Gates is doing a great. The Gates Foundation does a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
so.
check out our episode on Bill
one.
Gates.
Another one to check out. So.
It is, yeah. And as Luke said, check out those 3 links that he talked about earlier. I think that would be wonderful. Do you want to read them off again?
Yeah, so nothingbutnets.net, cdcfoundation.org, and malarianomore.org. Make sure you go there, donate, and help save a kid's life.
That's right. Make the world a better place. And until next time.
See ya.